The daily deposit screen allows you to post the payments that you've received in through the Glas-Avenue POS or the Accounts Receivable module into the check register. So if you currently only have the Accounts Receivable module, although you have the daily deposit screen, you don't need to use it to make any deposits because you don't have the accounts payable with the check register for it to go into. And also, if you have the accounts payable module but are not using it, again, you don't have to use the daily deposit screen. However, if you plan on using it in the future, if you haven't been posting the deposits, then you'll need to clear that screen out before starting up your check register. So let's go ahead and get started here. We'll go to AR and go to Daily Deposit. And this screen is going to pull up all of the payment transactions that have been put into the system that have not been marked for deposit yet. You'll go ahead and put in the date of the deposit. If you want to add any kind of additional reference information, you can add that in. In the account, if you have multiple bank accounts, you can pick which bank account that you're depositing that into. And then the payment types allows you to make selections here to see certain payment types. So if I just want to see the cash, I can choose that and just see the cash, or I can go and choose check. Or if I want to see a couple types, I'll just say selected payment types. I'll click the first one, let's say cash, and I'll hold down the control key and click the other ones that I want. So check, choose OK. Now I have all my cash and my check. Now when making deposits, of course you want the deposit to match the deposit that actually goes into the bank. So of course your cash and checks are deposited together, and then your credit cards are deposited separately. So generally speaking, if you've got cash, checks, and charge cards on a given day, you're going to need at least two deposits. You'll have your cash and check deposit as one, and then your credit cards as another. Now, it depends on how your credit cards are deposited. Most processors process all the credit cards together. You may have a situation where your American Express account is separate, so that might be a separate deposit as well. So if you're not sure, you might want to check with your credit card processor, or just look on your bank statements and see how those credit cards are being posted, if they're all one lump deposit for all the different types of credit cards. Now, in order to make the deposit, you simply check the checkbox here in the deposit column next to the items that you wanted to deposit. So if I wanted to deposit everything on 7/5, I would check that first one, and then I've got some more down at the bottom there, so I can go down there and check those off. Now, that kind of made it a little difficult there to have to scroll down there. It would have been easier if they would have been all together. So I'm going to first go ahead and click on the Undeposit All, and then we'll go back up to the top and show you another feature here. If I click on any of the column headers, it arranges all the fields by that. So if I click on the tran date once, it puts it in order by the transaction date, starting with the newest date. If I click on it again, it starts with the oldest date. So I'm going to go ahead and get it back to where it's all of the newest ones there at the top. Now another thing that I can do is if I click on a particular group, such as checks, I click on the first item there, I can go down and say deposit group, and it would pick all of the items that are in that group. Obviously, undeposit group would undeposit those items. And then, of course, deposit all deposits everything. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to mark my items that I want to deposit here. And then I get my total deposit there of $2,005. Now, can't stress this enough. Again, that total deposit in the bottom right corner, that amount needs to match what's going into the bank. So when you're adding up all your cash and checks, make sure that it equals the same amount that we have here in the screen. Now, in some cases, we might have a different amount. There can be different reasons for that. One reason might be that we took some of the cash out of the deposit so that we could make a purchase for some, maybe some office supplies. Another type of instance might be we might have received some sort of payment that was an actual payment for something that we invoiced in the system. Perhaps we had sent away for a rebate on some batteries that we bought, and we got the check back from that, and we want to go ahead and deposit it with our deposit here. So in either of those situations, whether we need to either take money out of the deposit or add money into the deposit, that we would go to the Adjustments tab. Now in our first scenario, let's say we took $20 out of the deposit, you would just put in a minus 20. And then if you're using the General Ledger module, you'll need to pick the General Ledger account. So let's say that was for office supplies. We could just put in office supplies. And now you see our total deposit is $1,985. If we went the other way, let's say we got our refund check for our batteries, and so those also would go to office supplies because that was the original expense. We added $5, so now our deposit's $2,010. So again, we just want to make sure that amount is the right amount. Now, if you make an adjustment, I always recommend adding a note so that later if we're looking back on this deposit and we see this adjustment and we want to kind of recall what it was for, we'll have a note in there that'll tell us. So we'll just type a little note in there. And now that I have everything marked and I'm ready to make my deposit, I simply choose Save. And now I've got my deposit here of all the things that have been deposited. It gives me a transaction number in the upper right hand corner there, so I know I've saved it. And now I can print this deposit, and I would definitely recommend printing the deposit out. We're just going to print it to the screen to look at it. Gives you the date of the deposit, the transaction number of the deposit, any reference information, and then what account this was deposited into. Shows all the items that were on that deposit. So we always have a way to cross-reference it. And then after you've deposited your cash and checks at the bank, you'll have your copy of the deposit ticket that the bank gives you. I would just staple it right to this printout here and keep the two together. And then if there's any questions down the road, you've got those both to reference back and be able to double check things. Once you've made your deposit, if you want to go ahead now and do your credit cards, simply hit New. And again, anything that you haven't deposited is going to be listed in the window here. And now we could go through and find all of our charge cards that we wanted to deposit and do the same thing. Just mark those and save the deposit. Now you will notice that there's some negatives, like we have a negative 249.59, then we have a positive one, we have a couple negative 200s, a couple of positive 200s. Those were from some credit and rebills that we did in the system for another tutorial, and there was a payment on the original invoice, and then we did a credit and we rebilled it and we left that payment on there. So the credit created the negative amount and the rebill had the positive amount. So those two are going to just cancel each other out and give us a zero amount. Also, if we scroll down here, I think, oh no, we need to maybe go up to the top. You'll notice some zero amounts. Again, when you do credits or credits and rebills with account customers involved, it has to create a payment transaction to link the credit back to the original invoice and so on. In something where it's an account, there is no actual amount. It creates a zero amount. So again, it's not going to hurt anything to deposit those and get those out of the screen because it's just a zero amount. And that pretty much wraps up the daily deposit screen. Again, just stress a few points here, making sure that total deposit number at the bottom matches what's being deposited into the bank. I know with charge cards, sometimes it can be a little confusing and we get a lot of questions on that. It doesn't matter what date it is. I know that charge cards typically don't deposit for a few days, but you can still put it with today's deposit. And generally, when you're reconciling your bank statement, you're looking at the amounts, not so much the dates of the transaction. So we really want to just make sure that amount is right. Something else that a lot of people do is with the online banking now, they just look at their online banking in the morning and before they do the deposit, they see what credit cards deposits have hit the bank, and they'll go through and mark those credit card transactions off and deposit them on that day so that they know they have the correct amounts. And also, if you do make an adjustment to the deposit, add a note, and that way you'll always know why that adjustment was made. It makes your life a lot easier down the road.